An empty colony. A single word carved in wood. CROATOAN. In 1587, more than 100 settlers crossed the Atlantic, guided by hope and desperation. Their destination: Roanoke Island, a fragment of land off the coast of what would later become North Carolina. To them, it was the promise of a new life, the foundation of England's first permanent colony in the New World. They built houses of timber, cleared fields for crops, and recorded their progress in journals filled with the language of ambition. For a time, it seemed as though Roanoke might endure, but the colony's roots were fragile. Supplies dwindled, relations with nearby tribes were strained, and storms battered the shoreline. When John White, the governor, sailed back to England for provisions, he left behind his daughter, his granddaughter, the first English child born in America, and the fragile beginnings of a community clinging to survival. He promised he would return swiftly. Yet years passed before he set foot on Roanoke's soil again. When he finally arrived in 1590, he found silence. The colony was deserted. Houses stood abandoned, their walls weathered but intact. No signs of battle, no graves, no bodies. Livestock gone, fields untended. It was as though the settlers had simply walked away. The only clue carved into the pale bark of a tree was a single word: CROATOAN. The meaning of this word has been debated for centuries. Was it a direction, a signal, a cry for help? To White, it suggested the colonists had relocated to CROATOAN Island, south of Roanoke. But storms and dwindling supplies forced him to abandon his search. He never saw the settlers again. In the centuries since, their absence has become legend. A community uprooted without struggle, without trace, leaving behind only one word, a word that has grown to embody the mystery itself. CROATOAN, a name carved into wood and into history. When John White finally set foot again on Roanoke Island in August 1590, he carried both anticipation and dread. For 3 long years he had been kept from returning, delayed by war with Spain, his ships seized for battle, his promises to the colonists stretched thin by time. Now, as he waded ashore, he expected to see familiar faces rushing forward: his daughter Eleanor, his granddaughter Virginia, the settlers who had entrusted their lives to his leadership. Instead, he was greeted by silence. The shoreline was deserted. The sound of gulls and wind through the trees replaced the laughter of children, the hammering of carpenters, the murmur of prayers. He and his crew pressed inland, moving past the weathered palisade and into the heart of the settlement. What they found was uncanny. Houses still stood, though weather-beaten. Tools were scattered, but not broken. Doors open, but not forced. It was as if the inhabitants had departed in haste, but not in panic. Then White saw it, the carving. Deep into the bark of a tree near the entrance, one word stood stark against the pale's wood: CROATOAN. The letters were deliberate, carved with care. To White, it was a sign. He had told the colonists that if they ever had to move, they should carve their destination into a tree or post. If they were in danger, they were to add a cross. There was no cross, only the word. For a brief moment, relief flickered in his heart. Perhaps they had gone willingly to CROATOAN Island, some 50 miles away, where a friendly tribe might have sheltered them. But as the search continued, the unease deepened. No boats remained. No tracks, no signs of travel. It was as though the colony had been lifted whole and carried away, leaving only the echo of their presence and that single haunting word. The men grew restless, unnerved by the emptiness. White longed to search CROATOAN Island, but a sudden storm, fierce and unrelenting, drove them back to sea. The opportunity slipped away. He never saw his family again. And so the colony remained, empty, spectral, and defined forever by a word carved into wood. The disappearance of the Roanoke colonists entered the official record with unsettling simplicity. Reports sent back to England spoke of an abandoned village, no sign of struggle, and one word carved into a tree, CROATOAN. To bureaucrats and courtiers, it was a curiosity, a puzzle to be filed among other colonial failures. But to John White, it was a wound that never healed. He wrote of his desperate desire to sail southward, to search CROATOAN Island for his family. Yet storms battered his ships, tearing sails and snapping masts, until his men refused to press on. Supplies dwindled, morale broke, and with a heavy heart, he turned back across the Atlantic. White returned to England, where his account was read with a mixture of fascination and indifference. His pleas for another expedition were ignored. The threat of Spanish war and the cost of distant colonies overshadowed the fate of 100 missing souls. The years that followed brought rumors instead of answers. Some sailors claimed to glimpse pale-skinned figures among native villages. Others whispered that the colonists had been taken by rival tribes, by disease, by hunger. Yet none of these tales were confirmed. Without bodies, without graves, the mystery grew deeper. In the margins of letters and diaries from the time, we glimpse the human weight of the loss. One English merchant wrote, "They are ghosts to us now, shadows carved in trees." Another noted that the word CROATOAN had begun to circulate in taverns and parlors, not as a place, but as a curse. It was spoken in hushed tones, as if the very letters carried misfortune. For White, the silence was unbearable. He had left behind a daughter and a granddaughter. Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America. They became symbols not only of hope, but of haunting absence. And so the Roanoke Colony slipped into legend, its final trace reduced to a single word whose meaning still eludes us. Was it a message, a destination, or a final cry into the void? In the centuries that followed, speculation about the fate of Roanoke became as enduring as the word carved into the tree. Theories sprouted like tangled roots, each trying to explain how an entire colony could vanish without struggle, without trace. The most accepted explanation was that the settlers sought refuge among nearby tribes. Some historians argue that they merged with the CROATOAN people, adopting their customs, their language, and their way of life. This, they say, is why no bones or graves were ever found, because the colonists ceased to exist as English, absorbed into another world. Yet even this theory fails to quiet the unease, for no tribe has ever claimed their bloodline, and no definitive proof has surfaced. Others point to famine. Supplies were scarce, storms frequent, crops unreliable. Perhaps desperation drove them into the forests, scattering them in search of food. But if hunger claimed them, where are the remains? Where are the shallow graves, the signs of struggle? Roanoke was empty, not ravaged. The silence of the settlement is too neat, too deliberate. Then there are darker suggestions. Some whispered that the colonists were slaughtered by hostile tribes, their bodies hidden deep in the swamp. Others insisted the Spanish, eager to snuff out English ambition, swept in by stealth and erased the settlement in secrecy. But again, no evidence, no weapons, no ash, no wreckage ever came to light. And then there is the theory that chills the imagination most, that the colonists vanished not through human hands, but by some force of the land itself. Early diaries mention strange lights in the woods, unearthly sounds carried on the wind, and fears of spirits that roamed the wilderness. To the superstitious minds of the 16th century, such things were no less real than hunger or war. Could it be that the word CROATOAN was not a destination at all, but a warning? Whatever the truth, the absence remains. 100 souls disappeared into the fabric of America's wilderness, leaving behind nothing but a word, an echo, carved in silence. As decades passed, the absence of the Roanoke colonists did not fade. It transformed. By the 1600s and 1700s, travelers, missionaries, and settlers claimed to encounter echoes of the lost colony in the most unexpected places. There were reports of native villages where children bore gray eyes, a feature uncommon among their people. English-speaking words, broken, half-remembered, were said to pass the lips of those who had never crossed the sea. Some colonial records mention entire families who seemed to appear from nowhere, their ancestry untraceable, their customs caught between two worlds. The whispers grew into folklore. Hunters spoke of pale figures glimpsed at the edge of campfires, dressed in worn English garments decades out of date. They did not speak, only watched before vanishing back into the tree line. Missionaries recorded stories told by tribes of a ghost village in the forest, where cabins stood empty but fires still burned, where voices could be heard though no one was seen. Even the word CROATOAN began to take on a life of its own. Sailors carved it into beams to ward off ill fortune. Superstitious colonists avoided speaking it aloud, fearing it carried a curse. In journals from Jamestown, one settler admitted, "We dare not write the word, for it brings silence to the room." And always the same refrain. Roanoke's lost souls were out there, absorbed, transformed, or wandering between worlds. They became a legend that blurred the line between fact and haunting. A story whispered to children as a warning and to skeptics as an unanswered riddle. The colony had ceased to exist in flesh, but in imagination, it was immortal. Every strange sighting, every ghostly sound in the woods became a possible glimpse of the vanished. And so, even without evidence, the settlers endured, haunting the new world, not as builders of a future, but as specters of a mystery never solved. By the 1800s, the mystery of Roanoke had ripened into legend, and the word CROATOAN began to appear far beyond the island. It was no longer just the remnant of a vanished colony. It became a symbol of disappearance itself, a word tied to death, loss, and the uncanny. In diaries from the 19th century, travelers scrawled of encountering the word carved into abandoned cabins deep in the woods, where no settler should have wandered. One Virginia farmer claimed to find it scratched into the beams of his barn after a night of strange lights in the sky. Another story tells of a gravestone unearthed with the letters faintly etched, as though the stone itself had carried the colony's memory into the earth. Even more unsettling are the connections whispered in later years. In 1849, when the famed writer Edgar Allan Poe lay delirious on his deathbed, some witnesses swore his final utterance was CROATOAN. Whether truth or invention, the claim cemented the word as an omen. In 1867, sailors lost at sea left behind journals with the word scribbled in margins, a final mark of despair, before silence swallowed them. By the early 20th century, paranormal societies and occultists embraced CROATOAN as a name not of place, but of curse. It seemed the word had escaped time, leaping from the 16th century into every shadow where the unknown dwelled. Was it merely a coincidence, a fascination repeated across generations? Or was it something deeper? An echo that clung to those marked for disappearance, a cipher woven into history itself. What began as a carved message on a tree had become more than a clue. It had become a pattern, a contagion of mystery. To whisper it was to invoke absence. To carve it was to surrender to silence. And so Roanoke's ghost was not confined to its own era. It bled into centuries, claiming new lives, new legends, all bound together by 6 letters that refused to fade. CROATOAN. Today, more than 4 centuries after the colony vanished, Roanoke remains one of history's most enduring riddles. Archaeologists have combed the island, unearthing fragments of pottery, broken tools, and traces of fires long extinguished. Historians have sifted through letters, diaries, and fading maps, yet the heart of the mystery remains untouched. Where did the colonists go, and why did they leave no trace but a single word carved in wood? Science offers measured possibilities. DNA studies hint at connections between native communities and English bloodlines, though none have proved definitive. Excavations have revealed evidence of settlements far from Roanoke, as though the colonists scattered across the land. And yet, none of these findings erase the chilling emptiness John White first encountered. The abandoned homes, the silence, the tree that whispered CROATOAN. But beyond the academic search, the legend has lived on in another way. To writers, artists, and storytellers, Roanoke has become a symbol of loss without answer, of humanity swallowed by wilderness. To ghost hunters and folklorists, it is a place where the veil is thin, where voices echo still in the trees. Some visitors claim they hear faint cries in the night wind, or see pale figures moving between the ruins. Others say the land itself resists settlement, as though the island keeps its secret close. And always, the word endures. CROATOAN, 6 letters carved into the imagination as deeply as they were carved into bark. A cipher, a curse, or a message across centuries. Its meaning remains unsettled, but its power undeniable. In the end, perhaps that is the true legacy of Roanoke. Not survival, not failure, but transformation into myth. A colony erased, yet never forgotten. A word that has become eternal. CROATOAN, the voice of the vanished, carved forever into history's silence.